Thank you for coming. I'm really honored to moderate this keynote session. We have keynote here. I want to deliver a quick introduction. So she doesn't like introduction.
Who said I like very long introductions?
Well, actually, everywhere she got a long introduction. She often told me that I not describe her as outstanding individual. It was not her actually, criticism. And she always says she's making an effort to do the better. Okay? And yet her life seems to quietly challenge that request again and again. Not because she seeks recognition, quite the opposite, but because her way of thinking, teaching, and being with others constantly exceeds the categories we use to phrase. Of course, her accomplishments are remarkable. Everybody knows. They speak for themselves, and they require no further elaboration. But we are not gathered here to celebrate her achievements. If that were our purpose, she would likely interrupt us with her usual mix of humor and protest. She has spent her life deconstructing the canon, including her own place within it. She really hates canonizing herself. She resists any attempt to fix her work into neat categories, East and West, theory and practice, and text and context, etc., etc. And she refuses to be placed in the heavens as if she were a star in some distant eastern sky. She does not want to be admired from afar. She wants to walk with us, to think beside us, to fail alongside us. That is how she teaches, not as master who commands attention, but as a companion who practices thought in the presence of others. For her, teaching is not about perfection, but persistence. She often says, the sum of my failure is myself. And in that, she offers us rare kind of example, not a model of success, but of responsibility. Not the glow of brilliance, but the groundedness of care. It is in that spirit that we welcome her, not to admire her from a distance, but to listen, to walk, and to think together. Please join me in welcoming Professor Gayatri Spivak.
Thank you, Alex. Now, is this mic? No. Let's get the mic moving. I brought this book. It's a book in Bengali that, as a result of the Holberg Prize, my friends put together in Calcutta. Many people like Deepesh Chakraborty, Partha Chatterjee. It's all in Bengali. They've written in Bengali, but many people whose names you know, also my friends, have pieces here. And there is one piece which is written by a young man, Shorav, and these people actually get all my stuff from Frontier magazine, which some of you, is there anyone in this, you know it. It's a very significant left of the left, critical of the parliamentary left magazine. And this person also has ironically given a list of all of the bad things that are constantly said about me on social media in India. And I brought it for that reason, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the way in which we are punished if we are not selling the stuff that we are expected to, visible minorities, we are expected to sell. So I brought that because someone else made that list. I didn't make it. And first I read it, I was hurt. But then I thought, it's good to have that list. So I brought it if the occasion arises. Now, I will think of this as my beginning moment. Okay, very good. And in the beginning, I will repeat myself on the, is the mic okay now? You can hear in the back. I will repeat myself on the, death of a discipline, because that is really part of this talk. I gave some of it already at the round table, but I think it bears repeating. Also, I'll repeat it because the death of discipline was not the only thing I wrote about planetarity. I did write the earlier one, 1997, the imperatives to reimagine the planet. That's the big one, and that's very unlike the death of discipline. And I also wrote for Emily Apter that dictionary entry, which is also very unlike. What is in the back? Take it off. People are looking at the screen and not listening to me. So I'll tell you when to, it's not that important, those pictures. Anyway, so this is why I felt that it was, I should repeat the death of a discipline part, because if you are going to follow something, you ought to read everything that has been written by that person on that issue, and you would have worked it out yourself. There is someone who has a theory about what he calls my intended mistakes. This guy teaches philosophy at the Indian Institute of Technology in New Delhi. It's a fantastic thing which really taught me something about what I do. But and I, from then on, started looking for intended mistakes in other people's texts. And Hegel's Phenomenology is a text which is absolutely written in terms of intended mistakes. It's an invitation to make certain kinds of mistakes the way Hegel writes, and it's fantastic to read it. But this thing was not an intended mistake. Okay, so my title is Selling Planetarity. The choice of titles was influenced by a perceptive question posed by our best psychoanalytic feminist critic, Hortense Spillers. What happens to protest when it becomes curriculum? This is Hortense's question. It is the question of institutionalization. Allow me to repeat something I said in Warsaw last year, when they were as excited about their humanities, society, identity congresses as you are about islands and archipelagos. Institutionality must be persistently and constructively resisted from within. Even as we senior folks acknowledge our complicity, complicit folded together, our complicity folded togetherness with the institution that also fosters us. So it's a contradictory relationship, a double bind, if you like. You cannot just accept institutionality as success. No way, you lose everything, because the institution we have inherited, as you well know, is the European Middle Ages. Why do you think we wear those regalias? That's the Middle Ages, that's Venice, that's before that, the Arabic universities. The European Middle Ages is still the big structure within which our universities function. So you give in to institutionalization and you think that is success, you've lost it. So on the other hand, you can't throw it away, you need the institution. So this is how you have to do this. When the Collège International de Philosophie was founded 40 years ago, I was a minor player, but I was a player. I liked it very much that Olivier was mentioning Lyotard, Jean-François, Derrida, myself in a minor way, we were the ones who actually went into the founding of that college. When it was founded 40 years ago, Derrida said, I quote the English translation, "We want to provide a place to work on the value and the meaning of the basic and the fundamental in its opposition to finalization." That is to say, that you establish it fully, totalization that I was talking about the last time. So that was his idea. He goes on then to speak of the opposition to the ruses of finalization. The institution will always want to make it final, total. That's the way, I can't work within institutions too well. 2 or 3 years ago, the Ministry of Education in West Bengal, my state, wanted me to be an honorary leader or whatever. And the thing is, I found out that it was impossible for me to do this because the bureaucracy, their goal is not really to fail, to learn from your failures, and then to go on that way persistently. Their goal is to implement. And in fact, this is something that's now happening also to our corporatized universities. At Columbia, the global centers, I say their idea of activism is target practice. We've hit the target. As to what happens after you hit the target, I mean, even my very dear friend Jeffrey Sachs hit the target. You go to those villages after Jeffrey has moved off, nothing. They don't feel that they own the changes that have been made. So therefore, this idea, the idea that there are all these ruses of finalization, the committees onto which you're put and so on. Okay, so so Derrida talks about the ruses of finalization and the juridical consequences of these ruses. These new responsibilities cannot be purely academic, he says. So this is something that I want to say right at the beginning, that towards institutionalization, we must have a double-bind sort of attitude. You can't just measure success in terms of that. It is within this context of a contradictory attitude to institutionality that one thinks of, quote, selling an idea. We follow the oldest sales technique here. What is that? Mine is best. That's it. In most critical theory, including the Archipelago, there are repeated assurances and the production of evidence that this theory is best for the production of knowledge. For organizing material into, quote, knowledge, much contingency has to be sacrificed. And I want to tell you something. I don't know how many of you know the work of René Mercado Zavaleta, Bolivia. Is there anyone here who knows Zavaleta's work? Okay, good. Because that's really someone you should read. Because he has an idea of this abrigado states, badly translated, motley. And he says that all of the strands, for example, in a place like Bolivia, which has quite a few very powerful indigenous strands, and some powerless indigenous strands, also the conquistadores, you name it. So you have to think of all of those strands as modern, and you must be able, so although Zavaleta was a Marxist, he never cut Bolivia into a Marxist format. Because he said, if I cut Bolivia into a Marxist format, much will have to be excluded. I remain a Marxist, but we must have this approach towards the abrigado state, the motley state, that each strand is modern, and learn to understand the state through each strand differently. rather than bring that to say they're all pre-modern, pre-political, and there's one Marxist explanation which is the correct one. That's what happens when you try to turn, when you're assured that my method is the best method for the production of knowledge. What you're doing is you're sacrificing much contingency in order to organize material into knowledge. And this is a very serious thing. And I want to say that if you, and I like Hegel very much, as you know, but Hegel, in the phenomenology, when he's making his final corrections, because his students, and just before he dies, this is not even finished, these corrections. One of the main things that he writes on is that it is through the accidental, and then the negation of the accidental, which shows that differentiation is similarity. That's how history moves, through the accidental. And so and that's what we call the contingent. You want to fit things for the best knowledge production, that's what you're going to lose. And so in order to keep this in mind, we must produce a mindset change. We must think of our pride and joy, our best method, as a methodological necessity. We have to go this way because this is the only way we know how to go. That robs reality in the interest of control. Because if you brought in everything, you wouldn't be able to control it, you know that. In order to be able to control, you summarize, you cut out. And this is, and you can't not do this, you have to do this in order to move forward. But if you think this is a good thing, it shows how reasonable you are and how your method is best, then it's a bad thing. Indeed, to use a practical phenomenological language, the form of appearance or Erscheinungsform of this knowledge is disciplinary. And we might, so all this talk about multidisciplinary, etc., I don't have the time already, I've only read half a page, I'll just stop. But, I mean, the paper's there. So all this talk about multidisciplinary is a bit of a bogus talk, because one is disciplinarized into one way it is disciplinary. And we might want to develop the same double binding attitude. I want the convenience and control, but I also want to have a strong enough practice so that I can give up control, displace myself into the space that I'm supposed only to know objectively. This is a humanity-style approach to the qualitative social sciences, to which I take you largely to belong. So it is within this double bind that I'm putting the practice of the sale of good ideas. It is an acknowledgement that institutionalized and disciplinarized, the multidisciplinary idea is deeply problematic, as I was saying, but no time for it now. So it is an acknowledgement that institutionalized and disciplinarized idea propagation must be on the model of marketing. Making people want against their desires. So it's the rearrangement of desires has something in common with marketing, selling. Even price inducements exist in the form of fellowships and varieties of financial aid, and of course, more than anything, corporate fundraising. See, the reason why my schools, unfortunately, I'm obliged to run on my salary and without corporate funding is not because I have a moral position, but with corporate funding, in the case of these schools, you would have to tell a lie right at the beginning that I'm going to succeed. It is, we are the ones who screwed these people, the untouchables and I'm a caste Hindu. I'm an atheist, but I was born a caste Hindu. And so historically, for thousands of years, we are the ones who ruined the people who are my students. So thousands of years of cognitive damage and historical crime can't be solved in my lifetime. I'm not being overly nervous here. This is a fact, a practical fact. So I can't get into this thing that really matters, repaying ancestral debts. I can't get into this by a lie. This is this is what I'm going to deliver. This is my deliverable. Can't do it. It's really, the whole thing is ruined. So therefore, I'm not against corporate funding. But in this case, to be able, if you pay income tax in the United States, corporate funding is nothing. But in this case, that kind of bad faith to enter, just as I also think it's a very bad idea to start in a foreign university by declaring your mother tongue as a foreign language so that you can actually use that as a foreign language for the resident dominant people. I think that is also profound bad faith. So to an extent, those kinds of gestures you really have to watch before anything. So that's what I'm talking about. The price inducements exist, fellowships, varieties of financial aid, corporate funding. The quote, double bind question in this form of appearance. And whenever I say form of appearance, I'm talking about practical phenomenology. That's more or less our method. That whole generation that learned from the French theories in the 1960s, that's more or less coming from Husserl to an extent, then coming from Hegel, that's the method. So whenever I say form of appearance, you don't define a thing because the thing will appear differently. So this is a humanities style approach, okay? The double bind question in this form of appearance is, how can marketing relate to the training for imaginative activism toward persistently transformative epistemological performance? How do these two things relate? That's in this form of appearance, that's the question. To confront this question is perhaps to admit that to market planetarity is to ignore that basic statement, which I keep repeating, produced by Mugiba Kyongo, around which I built my talk at Kyunghee University. I repeat, the planet, and I will keep on repeating because it's easily repeated, people don't really understand. See, that's the thing with quotes. When we heard about the trees sprouting in Iraq, that kind of patronizing attitude toward the planet is not what Mugi is talking about. Mugi is trying to teach us something about the vanity of human wishes. It's an old idea, but Mugi is saying it again. So this idea, I'll repeat it again, the planet does not need humans. This is a hard one. You can't just write it off by saying, look at the plants growing in scorched earth. No, we are talking about the planetary system. Humans are an accident there. What meaning do humans have in terms of not only the solar system, but beyond? With the things we see are light years old. Are we able to, in fact, think this and still move on? That's the question we are asking, not about making little jokes about the planet. The planet does not need humans. Humans need the planet. And it is this lately learned lesson that I ignored in advance in Death of a Discipline, a thoroughly institutionalized and disciplinarized piece of writing, a text where I enjoined US and international students to read planetarily, by which I seemed to have meant following the best rules of comparative literature, expanding it by way of the area studies disciplines consolidated by the National Defense Education Act of 1952. It was appropriately presented as a keynote at the annual convention of the American Comparative Literature Association. As I told you, Jonathan Culler thought it would expanded, be appropriate for the Velek Lectures, named after the Balkan father of the discipline. He was Czech, at University of California at Irvine. The rest, as they say, alas, is history. It was a symptom, I was a symptom, asking the disciplinary globe, with the US at its center, to be, quote, planetary in its method, reducing to no more than multilingual multiculturalism. And the multilingual was a joke. God speaks in English. My symptomaticity is confirmed by my subsequent lectures on the lovely British campus of the University of Pune, under the auspices of the brilliant Dalit scholar, my dear friend, the late Aniket Jaware, where I was asking Indian students of English literature to treat English as a unifying instrument to create not programs of global English, largely diasporic, but rather comparative literatures of Indian languages, all this subsequently printed as the 2014 book, Readings. Given your ontological commitment to the archipelago and the island, and your invocation of other Asias, it is in these areas that I will look for a new mindset to sell or market. I myself became aware of the importance of islands in 2003. The impetus for other Asias came to me in 1988 when Anahit Kasabian and David Kazanjian asked me why Armenia was not open to post-colonial studies. In 1996, by Najibullah's death and his body hanging with his trouser open to show his castration to school children. By Najibullah's death in 1996 and in Kabul, and my time in Hong Kong in 2001. That's where that book came from. And already in 1990, I had inaugurated the harsh limit thought of planetarity by way of a notion of the body that was ecologically extreme. The body, like all other things, cannot be thought as such as the body. It cannot be thought. It is in the rupture with nature, when it is a signifier of immediacy for the staging of the self, that is when it is thought. As body, it is a repetition of nature. As a text, the inside of the body, imbricated with the outside, is mysterious and unreadable, except by way of thinking of the systematicity of the body, value coding of the body. It is through the significance of my body and others' bodies that cultures become gendered, economico-politic, selfed, substantive. Okay, don't go to sleep. I see some of you are falling asleep. How can I make this interesting to you? You know, I mean, I don't know. On the other hand, perhaps you ate a big meal, I don't know. But try. Okay, as body, it is a repetition of nature, say I. Talking to Ellen Rooney 35 years ago. It is a conversational restatement of Marx's phrase, unorganische Leib, usually translated inorganic body, as Toshia Ueno was pointing out at the time of the round table, that it was, that I had said body without organs. So I checked again. You should check when someone criticizes you. So in fact, I was right. Because inorganic body, in fact, I will, from now on, when I quote it in English, I will not use inorganic body. Because inorganic, as in inorganic chemistry in German, is unorganische Chemie. And so when Marx writes unorganische Leib, he is not writing inorganic. he's actually writing without organs. So therefore, usually, but more accurately perhaps, should be given as body without organs in French, corps plein sans organes, also found in the work of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, a passage quoted in contemporary archipelagic thinking and managed by dismissing it as mere poetry and moving on to empirical reference to actual archipelagos. Let me say, I'm not going to be able to stop there, but what they are talking about is something very interesting that most people still are not able to appreciate. And already in the second chapter of the La Grammatologie, Derrida writes about this, that with digitality, with informatics, what we are beginning to understand is what people like Benjamin understood before, that the source, and Lacan certainly in his idea of consciousness like a bicycle chain going round and round and round and round, suddenly something clicks and signification. That the source of signification is not meaningful. Informatics has made this absolutely clear to us, but we don't act like that. We still act according to the old empirical referential kind of thinking. And that's what Deleuze and Guattari and company were talking about when they were talking about corps plein sans organes, etc., desire like a ham bone, and so on. They were trying to make us understand that the origin of meaningfulness is not meaningful. It was not for dismissal as just poetry, and we are better because we in archipelagic thinking can do it, can give you knowledge through empirical geography. That was a misunderstanding. But at any rate, if we wish to sell archipelagism globally by networking yet respecting Ruby's caution on planetarity, we must not claim better knowledge production via empirical geographical accessibility. At this point, postponing discussion, let us at least say, phenomenologize, remembering that borders are fake, yet potentially violent, both geographically, borders are fake, the earth is unmarked, but potentially violent. And also, as Lacan points out, when we claim our body as body, borders first. And all of those holes that Lacan points at are places of violence. So phenomenologize, remembering that borders are fake, yet potentially violent, and that the planet is unmarked. This is what Ruby is asking you. Whatever you say about borders, the planet is unmarked. Marx, the humanist, also, I think I was being given a lecture in Althusser at the time of the round table saying, no, Marx, after the economic and philosophical manuscripts, absolutely, no. If you read the economic and philosophical manuscripts and their bodies without organs and the story of how agriculture was capitalized, everything else from the economic and philosophical manuscripts, 1844 to the first edition of Capital, 1867, everything else is changed, but not primitive accumulation. It's almost word for word the same in the 1844 manuscripts and the 1867 first edition of Capital. So Althusser's decision that there was an epistemological cut is wrong. If you actually go into these more carefully, you will see that that is not so. Just as it is also wrong, how can I say wrong with such confidence? Because you read with care 100 times, so that it is not I who's saying wrong, I'm saying, as for Marx, my brother, that it is wrong. Because I've tried to insert myself into that text, not just reading bad English translations. That is not the way to go. Every mother tongue is important. That's why one reads these great texts as they were written in a mother tongue. You understand that about your own mother tongue. Why don't you understand it about... My mother understood. Remember that story that I said in Rethinking Comparativism, that we were standing together in Paris, and we had been at the wonderful colloque Fauquondien, where we heard wonderful French. My mother even tried to learn a little bit of French, and we were there together. And then we are standing at CDG at the airport, and I suddenly hear this awful New York accent saying, "Cup of coffee." And I say to my mother, "You can't put it in your ear." And my mother says to me, she was much shorter than I, but she draws herself up and she says, "My love, it's a mother tongue." My mother, who grew up in British India, had the imagination to understand that English is also a mother tongue. But we don't understand any of that. So when we read Marx carefully, then on Marx's behalf, I can say, not for me, that it is wrong. So Marx, the humanist, also managed the body without organs as species life, Gattungsleben, by looking at the development of class-conscious socialism as species being, Gattungswesen, literally species essence. It's more than species being, that's a bad translation. The word Wesen is more than just being. This species essence is also the dynamics of the pre-industrial capitalism that capitalizes agriculture as so-called primitive accumulation. It begins with the first bit of agriculture. I would ask the feminists here to read Christine Brooke Rose's Subscript. That's written in the voice of a cell at the beginning. It's an extraordinary book, but she presents woman as the better mouthpiece of history, because woman naturally moves, is made to move, whereas men move differently. So that this really in fiction is supported beautifully. This species essence is also the dynamics of the pre-industrial capitalism that capitalizes agriculture as so-called primitive accumulation. As we attempt a global mindset change back into species life, it's almost impossible, but that's what we need today because of the Anthropocene. That's the mindset we need. That's Mungi, back into species life, going back from taking the way backwards from Marx's story. It's not degrowth, that's a bad metaphor. As we attempt a global mindset change back into species life, the extreme ecological sense of the body, an impossible move, but we must keep at it, including modern indigenous systems, because indigenous systems are also in modernity. And since Alex has done me the honor of asking me to sound the keynote of this collective, I will take the trouble of pointing out that this is the remote trace of planetarity in my thought. I know there are scholars of psychoanalysis in this room. To them I say, I was there in 1990, trying epistemologically to move back up from Lacan's version of the emergence of the subject in that extraordinarily powerful essay, The Dialectics of the Subject, the thing. I came to ocean thinking in 2003 and wrote it out this way. This is written in 2003 as musings on the world island. This is me in 2003, before I knew any of it. We are all islanders. I am from the island of Eurasia, and I have lived for 50 years on the island of the Americas, called the Greater Caribbean, ironically beautiful, called the Greater Caribbean by Jack D. Forbes. These are big islands. In 2001, I taught for a semester at the University of Hawaii and fell in fascination, as one falls in love, with the idea of Oceania. I began to think then that neither Europe nor the United States of America could think of itself as an island. The point is not to go away from them, but to change them. And therefore, they were out of touch with the reality of the world. Not only that no man is an island, but that we are all islanders. In 2004, Maurice Condé invited me to speak to the descendants of indentured Indian laborers on the island of Guadeloupe. I sang to them an island dream song by Rabindranath Tagore. Is there anybody who knows Bengali here? No. Okay, well, then I won't tell you what song. I sang to them an island dream song by Rabindranath Tagore and demonstrated to them, these descendants of indentured Indian laborers, how distant we mainlanders, we the elite, we mainlanders had been in our island fantasies from the reality of their lives. India could not think of itself as an island, a corner of an island, although the old name, which certainly Japan knew, was Jambudvipa, Deepa, island. So I began to think then that the idea of nations, older than nationalisms, something like born sames, reflected men harnessing reproductive heteronormativity to push away the bigger heterogeneity of the island, was ever in a double bind with our islandedness. History nestles in that denial of that impossible truth of space. And this is a feminist thinking, which of course I can't develop here. Anyway, I'll have to stop soon because I don't want to take too much of your time. I now think of Oceania as a heterogeneous place, I wrote in 2003, a model for the world island, an invitation to develop island consciousness beyond continentality. There is no mainland. In today's world, everything is modern. The promises of a level playing field. If we develop island consciousness, know that the globe is a cluster of islands in a sea of traces, and approach the heterogeneity of the ocean world with patience, collectively and bit by bit, rather than all at once, it's maybe the only way to find out why that field, that cluster, floating in the world ocean is so uneven a relief map. Around that time, I proposed the theory of women in exogamy as the first diasporics. I gave this talk in Vienna, and they had wanted me to give talks on diasporics, and they had said that I would go and say, love me, I'm an Indian. So I actually developed this theory, which I still think is a wonderful theory. But I've not done anything with it because this best theory stuff to me is a little scary, so I put it aside. But I proposed a theory of women in exogamy as the first diasporics, which was imbricated with the masculinism of nationalism that I just spoke of. And as some of you know, this entire mindset of my way is the best and knowledge control has seemed to me to fit the normative idea of masculinity, mine's best. I don't, of course, think that the essence of the female or the servant is to surrender or to attempt to displace oneself into the other's field of desire. But historically, this was largely our lot. Not everywhere, class has to be thought about, but historically, this was largely our lot, women and servants. And we could have turned it around today as the strongest weapon against the Anthropocene if it were not already too late, to change what is defined as a weakness to a strength that is too late. I shared my islands in the ocean thought with Gary Okihiro, who then sent me his book, Boundless Sea. Anybody know him here? Which I liked because, like me, he had tried to build a textured relationship with an African space, not just structured, but textured, like, invisible mending, with an African space. Although unlike me, his quote, first language was Pidgin. And my first language, 1,000 years old, having different alphabet, beautifully structured, etc., etc. Big difference between Gary and me. So there was, so he was archipelagist in his understanding of history, although I did not know the word then. My mother was Okinawan, he wrote. My father was Japanese. They were a mixed race couple. Japanese in Hawaii, Tamashiro Baishiro recalled, believed that Okinawans were of a different race. It's a quote. They thought that the Okinawans had tails. Okasan, his mother, was born to migrant laborers from Okinawa. On a personal level, her father might have fled Okinawa, seeking refuge from Japan's colonial rule, and her mother escaped from the grinding poverty of peasant life in Osato village on Okinawa Island. From another standpoint, from a world system perspective, my mother's parents, he wrote, were among the tens of thousands of migrant workers from Okinawa and Japan. You see, this is a shining swan, the form of appearance. See, the German word is so much in my chest that I was forgetting what the English was. From a world system perspective, my mother's parents were among the tens of thousands of migrant workers from Okinawa and Japan, recruited by Hawaii's sugar planters. They moved from the periphery to the core, supplying cheap, efficient labor to produce fruits of empire to profit masters of industrial and finance capital. I also resonated with Gary's simple spherical intuition of the earth. I haven't really spoken about it here, but I believe I spoke about it at Alex's university about how we do earth in the villages, earth's roundness, in what ways we do earth's roundness, and the earth moving with the stick and the sun, etc., but I can't go there. But Gary also has this simple spherical intuition of the earth as an impossible, our world. An intuition I have been able to share with my Aboriginal students and teachers. An intuition my teachers there in the villages, they think it's so important that they want me to share it with their entire social formation. They want me to say this to the entire village, the oldies, etc., etc. The Africans are hanging on the other side of the globe. Of course, I don't say Africans to my school teachers. It has to be Americans because I found them, right? The ones who are hanging on the other side of the globe, and they can see on the globe, it's on the other side. So, but in the case of Gary, it's Africans. It's the spherical intuition of simple spherical intuition of the earth. Why don't they fall off? Madhakarshan! My students would scream. Madhakarshan, the Bengali word for gravity. They've learned. Madhakarshan. They know. Why aren't they falling off? They're right there hanging down from the globe. Madhakarshan. So it's a beautiful word. Madha is middle, akarshan is pulling. So the other side of the globe intuition works with my Columbia students as well. Now, I'm almost, no, I still have time. Okay, here is Okihiro. And this is where he and I are very, very much alike. He says, an imaginary straight line through the Earth's core connects my points of origin. See, this is exactly what I do in the villages. The antipode of Hawaii, the islands of my physical birth, is Botswana, the landlocked nation of my intellectual birth. On the other side, antipodes are oppositional, but also corresponding. Hawaii and Botswana cohere in my life and life's labors. Another fanciful line, marking the tropics, brushes Hawaii to the north and Botswana, the south. You have no idea how much this appeals to people who have never had a cartographic imagination. You know, the Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, Korkot Kranti, Makar Kranti, that's what it is in Sanskrit and Bengali, right? And Vishuvarekha, the equator. You have no idea how thrilled my students are in the villages because I've crossed, coming from Accra, I've crossed the whole African continent, then from Dubai, the whole of Asia to come to Korea. This is for them a drama. It's not just 2 aeroplane flights. So all of this, I'm not going to read all of Gary because then I don't get to my own words, but I have a long quote here. He says, islands and continents conjoined by the artifice of antipodes, Hawaii and Botswana are, like all Earth's landmasses, islands. This is not empirical geography. This is thinking differently. I want to add my own word here about the, quote, namic languages of Africa, written upon the memory, survival languages today, wrongly called oral, unsystematized by the missionaries. The unsystematized, quote, mother tongues of Africa. The question of translation is changed if you think of them because they're unsystematized. Remember, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the missionaries internalized a certain kind of model of what a language is. They took some of the more popular African languages and put them in boxes with the name of a language and the vocabulary, orthography, grammatization, not necessarily a bad thing, but it was primitive, writing on a piece of paper, whereas the namic language people, the oral language people, they were digitizing before the digital, writing on memory. And so we got huge lingua francas like Kiswahili or Yoruba or Hosa or Zulu, but these are lingua francas. Thousands of unsystematized languages are still in existence, which are like a flow because they have not been, I'm not romanticizing at all, they have not been systematized according to that restrictive model that the missionaries had. There is a lot of dialectal continuity between these languages, but also multilinguality. You have to redo the concept of translation. When I'm talking to Henry Chakawa, who is not dead, another Kenyan, Mubi's friend and mine, an important publisher, he is not speaking Kikuyu because that is systematized. He is talking, as it happens, to the guy who teaches surrealism at Kenyatta University, but they are talking in Kimaragoli, which is an unsystematized language, a first language shared by them, not written on the memory. Because it is not systematized, only 30 to 40% is understood. Henry Chakawa says the idea that 100% can be understood is existentially impoverished, and he starts to laugh because he's, of course, making a joke. He's referring to the so-called post-structuralism. There is then this huge phenomenon where the idea of an original is undone as the languages flow into one another. Of course, historically, Africa went its own way with all the violence, fear, and greed common to human beings, and two great imperialisms, Islamic and European. Yet, in principle, it is possible to argue that such mnemic languages, not inscribed externally, could intrinsically have contained the Anthropocene. Simon Gikande tells me that these languages, each a little different from the adjacent ones, go all the way down the eastern side of the African continent into the very borders of Bantustan. Can we not see this as an archipelagic formation? The language is like a cluster of interrelated islands, potentially capable of helping to produce the episteme that might have restrained the Anthropocene. This use of Africa, I'm not going to read anything else, this use of Africa to expand the archipelagic is not to metaphorize the geographical. That's primitive critical theory, no. It's not to metaphorize the geographical. The geographical is itself a metaphor, writing on the geo. It's not to metaphorize the geographical. Maps are fictional. Metaphorize the geographical. It is incorrect to separate the ethical and the epistemological. The two relate loosely in the phenomenological, dependent upon the situation, as the French call situation. In this case, it can undo the binary opposition between island and continent and make the archipelago appear in the form of continentality, form of appearance. This undermines the implicit territorial ontology of archipelagism. In, quote, Can the Subaltern Speak?, we saw the flattening out into rational linearity of the different forms of appearance of the law. Shruti or hearing, one form of appearance. Smriti or remembering, the next one. Shastra or reading, the third one. And Vyavahara or doing, four forms of appearance, the phenomenology of the law. This was straightened out by William James as William Jones as a linearity. That's what Can the Subaltern Speak? The law part. That's what it is. The introduction of African unsystematized namic form of archipelagic appearance undoes the possibility of a similar move on our part. It's not only the colonialists who make those kinds of moves. We do too when we go on that male model kind of new thinking. I would, for example, suggest adding a last stanza to Craig Santaspiris's moving poem, Guam, where we should move out to the great American island, ironically renamed, as I have already pointed out, almost in anticipation, the Greater Caribbean. Then it will become the kind of poem that we can change our mindset to. Okay, now there is another. I've read about half. I think I'm not going to read any more. I'm just 7 minutes short of an hour. What I'm going to do is just read the last chapter. What do you say? That way at least you will know where I was going at the end. Du Bois, actually. I'll tell you, I'll read the postscript, okay? Okay, all right. Postscript. The word Nusanta, some of you know this word, celebrated by Southeast Asianist archipelagists, is Dipanta, if the first syllable is restored to Sanskrit. Nus, island, Dvipa, Dipanta. One of the punishments for the terrorist men and women who participated in the armed struggle against British imperialism. Dipanta. You know, remember the word diaspora in the Alexandria Codex is a punishment. God punishes the Jews for forgetting Hebrew. We forget that initial meaning, punishment. So this one of the punishments. So if you restore the nus to Sanskrit, Dipanta, it's a punishment for the terrorist men and women who participated in the armed struggle against British imperialism. They took away the refined Sanskrit polysemic word, these terrorists, antara. And by the way, I don't know who has consulted a very simple Sanskrit dictionary and given the word antara in that discussion one meaning. No, sir. This is a very old language. Antara has many, many meanings. We can even, you know what I'm talking about. And in fact, we can even change meanings with the word antara. I can make up words that will do something. So you don't do archipelagism like that, looking at simple dictionaries. You have to involve yourself more. Anyway, so they took away these terrorists, they refined, they like the Buddha, they rebelled against the refined elite language. They took away the refined Sanskrit polysemic word antara and substituted the Arabic origin word chalan, meaning cargo transport for humans who were being taken to these islands, as in the Middle Passage. So it became Deep Chala, not Deepanta, but Deep Chala. And you know, I have a song there which nobody understands. But this is a song that was sung a great deal by these terrorists, saying, "Say farewell, mother. I'll smile when I put on the noose, and the Indians will see." And then, etc. And the last line of the first stanza, "Holo ovirame deep chala, dipanta, nusanta. Holo ovirame deep chala." That's a punishment. Or khudirame pasi. He was hanged. Khudira. See, I get choked with this because I'm born close to the first independence. As Indian myself, I would recommend an analysis of cultural imperialist inscription, cultural imperialist Indian inscription in that particular archipelago, and those kinds of histories in other archipelagos. You can't forget it and look at a little dictionary and say this is what Nosantar means. As a note on the sexual politics of such struggles, I quote the rest of the song supplied by Parthu Chatterjee yesterday. See, this is really interesting. And again, it says, 12 লক্ষ 33 কোটি রইল মাতুর বেটা বেটি. Okay, so 33 million 1,200,000 mother you have sons and daughters, because he is addressing his mother, saying, say goodbye, mother, I'm going to put on the noose. So you have all this. You, mother, run your household with them. তাদের নিয়ে ঘর করিস না, বউদের করিস দাসী, and make, this is the feminist part, make their wives servants. Hey, bouদের করিস দাসী. I would like to think he wrote it because he could get the rhyme. বউদের করিস দাসী, 10 মাস 10 দিন পরে জন্ম নিব মাসির ঘরে. After 10 months and 10 days, I will be born on my auntie's house. You know, we believe, the Hindus believe in regeneration. And if you can't recognize me, mother, look for the mark of the noose on my skirt. This is a song by the terrorist armed strugglers against imperialism, okay? But in it, sexual politics is horrible. Okay, then just listen to it. Post-script. When you say rhizome, show that thing, the black. When you say rhizome, do not say Deleuze only, say Du Bois. Here is a rhizomatic chart I put together from page 210 of the Aptheker edition of The World and Africa by Du Bois, published one full, it's not like the little lists in Mille Plateau, published more than 30 years before Mille Plateau. You will find the chart in my forthcoming book, Enslavement Globalized, My Brother Wohlfahrt. So this is my post-script. When you say rhizome, think about Du Bois. This is the whole history of slavery and domination and exploitation in a chapter called The Rape of Africa, of the globalization rhizomized. In conclusion then, a summary of what I would have read if I had read responsibly rather than just stop. In conclusion, a summary. 2 symptomatic books by Spivak. Then mindset change required by archipelagic thinking. Then Ocean Island Think and Okihiro. Then Africa as speculative epistemological instrument. Then historical scrutiny required by archipelagic thinking. And then I'm not giving you what would have come after that, readings of Marguerite Duras and Ritik Ghotok, rhizome in Du Bois. Sustaining argument, leadership talk, and best methodship, more male model, surrender to the other space, more feminine and servantly. My parting urge, please learn to find yourself in giving up, even as you earn your living. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please give her a big hand again. Really fascinating, and then really resonated in all the topic. We actually try to build up through a 3 days conference. Really, she is a big, the concluding. Of course, she doesn't want to, be concluding the word. But anyway, just we can have some conversation with her. The relying on your own experience. We are from all different islands. Actually, the Professor Spivak also emphasize every island has all different language and different experience and different story. So I think we actually should, it doesn't mean just the integration of these differences, but try to spread out the dissemination of these differences onto the surface of so-called globalization. And then she actually gave us some quite insight, how to actually engage this kind of some dominant discourse, and then theory, so-called, and then try to find out our own word and voice. So I think you would have some kind of many questions, but because of a limited time, I want to collect just 3 questions, and then we're gonna finish actually this session. So, question on the floor. Right over there, and then here, the white striped shirts. The white shirts, white striped shirts.
Where are you, white stripe?
That was my question.
You must raise your hand.
Thank you very much. My name is Gayatri Spivak from Bangkok, Thailand. I'm here.
Put up both your hands and I'll know which one, because I'm 83 years old, I don't see so good.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, thank you very much. So when you mentioned...
I would have called it a black stripe shirt.
It's actually blue.
Carry on.
Yeah, okay, I lost my question now. When you mentioned the, sort of antipodal link between how the book that you just read, between Hawaii and Africa.
Boundless sea.
Boundlessly. Yeah.
Boundless sea, don't forget.
Okay.
Boundless sea. It's not the book I described. It was written by someone else.
Oh,
Boundless
right.
sea.
Yeah. Okay. And in the paper that I just presented on the first day, actually, it comes from my book, and actually, I was reading fast because we mentioned almost the same thing, because I talk about what I term the antipodian translation, which is the concept that I use to describe translation in the Southeast Asian context. So basically, what you mentioned is very important because I'm from the peninsula, I'm from the continental side, and I always think of Thailand that way. But archipelagic thinking come to me and made me realize that it can also affect people from the peninsula, people from the continent.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. And my idea is that how about the continent, in your opinion, the peninsula, the landmass, when it is just not an island, but it has something that the antipodes can offer. Like when you think of, for example, when I think of Thailand, there can be a relationship with the other side of the world through, if you just dig down across the planet.
I'm going to stop you because you're just going on and we have no time. I would have liked more than 3 questions. Yes, sure, you feel that you agree with me and you're asking me the continents also provide this. I think in my talk I said yes. So the short answer to your question is yes. And you have a lot of things to say to me. We will talk in some other way. This is not
Okay,
a
so
good thing.
thank you, sorry.
Let's hear the second one. And please, make your question brief. Think about other people. See, I cut short my paper because I didn't want to take your time. I only read half.
Yeah,
So
hopefully
be
we publish
careful.
that. Yeah, sure. Another second question? Okay. The purple. Purple shirt. Sorry. No, please actually,
Thank you for your lecture. 한국말로 질문해도 될까요? 네. 이해가 많이 부족한 상태에서 그 셀링 플레이터리티와 온톨로지 오브 아일랜드와의 관계 또는 지구 더 온톨로지 오브 얼스 이런 어떤 릴레이션 관계에 대해서 좀 많이 모르지만 좀 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
소개를 좀 해주세요.
저는 I'm physics teacher in high school.
성함을 말씀.
My name is 소영로입니다. 예, 소영로.
Physics Station High School. And what? And what? No, okay, planetary and what I didn't get the second word. Spell it. Oh, climate change, okay.
How can we apply this concept for the understanding?
Okay. Very good question. I'm going to speak slowly. You understand me, don't you? Or don't you? You want to translate?
이해를 잘 하셨냐고 물어보시죠.
Can you repeat the question? The question is?
What is the relationship between planetarity and climate change? Is the question.
Real actually the application for the strategy.
People must be able to be brief. You know what I mean? I mean, you adults. You know. Okay. What is the relationship? Planetarity is a word. It's an English word which can become planétarité in French, but in the Romance languages, in German, it goes off from us. So I used the word in a certain way. Planetarity is not a thing. So the climate change, on the other hand, is a thing. So therefore, the relationship, it's not a real relationship. The way I used the word planetarity would say that the climate change, that was my argument, has gone so far that, I mean, if you live in the United States, which is supposedly still the world's most powerful country, and a huge space with lots of oil and all of that, and you see each and every one of the climate change change stoppers being unstopped, then you don't really feel like this is a joke. So you feel, and then you see Australia burning. Australia was burning long before all of this is happening now. You see Canada burning. The Canadian fires made the skies in New York City dark. That's a long way off. It's not a joke anymore. Every day there are floods so that people are being killed day after day. These are not, I mean, you have to be living in some wonderful space where none of this happens in order to be able to ignore the fact that it is too late, that the way the temperature is rising is much more than had been predicted, so that all of the earlier predictions had been changed. This is a thing, and the planetarity, the way I had used it, was in 1990, for example, for the human being to be aware that the planet does not exist because all of these humanists, including Marx, De Gaulle, you name it, they all thought, you will find them, they all thought that to use nature was the Stoffwechsel with nature, as Marx would say. To use nature for human progress was the best way for mankind to progress. Now we have to think that that was a mistake. And so you can find the primitive accumulation business already in many people's thought, that with Marx put it properly, that was one of Marx's great advantages. He was so smart, very brilliant, counterintuitive man. Even Engels didn't understand him. Constantly, if you look at the manuscripts, constantly tries to make him into common sense. Most of the American romantic anti-capitalists follow that, and the living labor, dead labor is that romantic anti-capitalism. But nonetheless, he put it in that way. So what we have to do is to think about the fact that the planet is not the planet cannot oppose, the planet cannot be an alternative. The planet is we have absolutely no relationship to the planet as the way I was using it, the planet as such, the planetary system, as I say to my rural students, the music of the spheres, we can't hear that. So, you know, so therefore, the use of my word was there because I was thinking like many people. I was not alone. Although in this book, Dipesh has very kindly said that I thought about planetarity long before he did. It's very kind of him. He said it in English also. So that's what we were thinking about. So that's the relationship, but the relationship is only the way in which I used the English word planet. So, I mean, I'm not going to say, this has to be the relationship. No, that was just me thinking. You like me thinking? Good, read me, have fun. But this is, I'm not giving you the best way to think about climate change, no. So, the climate change, it's a different way of behaving in different areas, which is, you know, if you look at Namibia and you look at Bangladesh, it's not the same. So, therefore, it's a collective thing, imagining differently, etc. So, that's the relationship between planetarity and climate change. I have no idea if you understood me, but thank you for your question. Some of you understood me. Okay.
제가 직역을 다 해드릴 수는 없고 한마디로 말씀드리면 플래네터리티는 우리가 오해하는 것과 달리 플래닛가 존재하지 않는다라는 말씀이시고요. 그것은 무슨 말인가 하면 인간의 관점에서 사유하지 않아야 된다는 뜻이에요. 그걸 통해서 클라이밋 체인지는 각 나라별로 또 각 지역별로 다르게 경험하기 때문에 그런 문제와 플래네터리티라는 관점에서 그 클라이밋 체인지와 같은 구체적 문제를 봤을 때 새로운 어떤 전략들이 나올 수 있다는 말씀이시고요. 그래서 오해와 달리 플래네터리티는 플래닛이 대안이기 때문에 뭐 자연으로 가자 이런 이야기가 아니다라고 말씀을 하시고 계십니다.
Okay, one thing I have to say, which is talking about climate change. You know the great Indian poem, 3,000, no, not that old. But anyway, the poem, The Cloud Messenger, Meghaduta, you know that. Okay, the Cloud Messenger by Kalidasa begins with the line, Asharasya Prathamadivase, on the first day of Ashar, which is basically the 15th of June. Okay, for those so many centuries, that has been the date on which the monsoon starts. Maybe one day more, maybe one day less, but Asharasya Prathamadivase. It's gone because of climate change. So that's a big thing that even we literally people can understand. And so they can't grow their crops properly because the rains don't come properly. But for us, what is really significant is that old epic poem of the cloud moving and the rain falling, etc., that the date remained the same for 1,000 years. That's gone. That's a big one. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Okay, third question. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Mazda from Christian University, Indonesia, Jakarta, Indonesia. You talk about selling planetary, and I also heard that you talk about mother language, various languages. Will you please say the connection? I just don't get it. The connection of mother tongue, various languages, and selling planetary. Thank you.
There is no connection between planetarity and mother tongue. What I was saying is that I was making two, I'm sorry you don't get it, but I was making two different arguments. You know, in a single essay there can be different arguments, and that's what I was doing. I was talking about the mother tongues because there are in Africa, also in fact in India, Amitav Ghosh has written about that, and in fact also in Latin America, there are languages, but in Africa most of all, in languages which have not been systematized in the way in which so-called Indo-European languages have been systematized, or so-called Finno-Ugric languages have been systematized, or the ideographic languages have been systematized. Now, these languages exist. So therefore, what I was saying was that when you read, I was talking to people who only read English translations. That has nothing to do with planetarity. That has to do with bad education. So that you don't know that where everybody's mother tongue has a specialty. We can't learn, I'm not talking about planetarity, we can't learn all the languages of the world. Therefore, we should be humble in front of the world's wealth of languages. But we should try to learn at least one language which is not just from my corner of the world. So just another East Asian language. No, try to at least, you have one life, and the world is so full of languages, and each language, I don't like the word mother tongue, obviously I use that because that's used in Africa, but in the first language, what happens? We learn that language before our brain develops. We learn that language as we are in the cradle. So therefore, that, I hope you're getting it. Are you getting it? So, because there was a little bit of rudeness in the way you spoke to me. You don't say to an old professor who's been teaching for 60 years, I don't get it. Which implicitly says you couldn't explain. But anyway, so what happens with the mother tongue is that since we don't have our brain, and so fully developed, so we can't learn genders, and we can't learn futures and tenses and verbs, and we can't learn the difference between nouns and adjectives. So the way we are learning is actually hits semiosis, making of signs in our brain matter, psychological matter, which are not accessible to us. The little baby doesn't know any of this, and yet the baby learns that first language really well, without any problem. So therefore, that's the relationship between the mother tongue, as we are saying, the first language, and ethical possibilities are before rationality. It's just a practical fact. The baby makes noises, and the parents learn that noise language. And that noise language, the parents learn that language. And that noise language is put into a historical language which the parents speak. This is a fascinating thing, and this can happen with every language. So if you don't bother to learn at least the texts that you are really interested in, that you want to follow, that you want to write on, we are academics. If you don't want to learn that one language or two, then what have you understood? Nothing. Nothing. So because you know very well that in your own mother tongue, if one only reads stuff in translation, then they really don't get it. So, I'm sitting here, as I was telling you, we were taught by our parents never to speak in Bengali in front of people who didn't understand Bengali. But somehow that's not obeyed by anyone anymore. Everybody speaks in Korean here. I don't understand anything. I sit like this. But why do you do that? Because it's only in the mother tongue that you can really make yourself understood. So you don't think other human beings have mother tongues? That's what I was talking about. It has nothing to do with planetarity. I hope I'm clear now.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we should stop now. So let's go. Please give her the big hand. Okay. Thank you very much. Very fascinating.